Chandrasekharji to garland Mahatma Gandhi's photo. Should have a very authentic representative of his thought, a person whom increasingly people regard as the conscience of India, because he stands for elimination of colonialism, racial discrimination, and authoritarianism in all its forms. In spite of having been the Prime Minister of this country, he has not allowed official shackles to bind him. And one can only remember the words of Mahatma Gandhi himself at the Round Table Conference, when he said that to the British that you cannot escape two facts. First, that under British, India has become the world's poorest country, and second, that it is denied advantages and decencies to which any free country is entitled. We are today therefore hoping that Sri Chandrasekharji, in line with Mahatma Gandhi and Sri Jayaprakash Narayan's thinking, will give us some ideas and thoughts on India's rights and responsibility to bring human rights violations in Asia and in Tibet in particular to the attention of the world society. We are all aware of the events in Nepal, where, facing a lot of opposition from both friends and foes, he went there and is the one person responsible for today Nepal being a democratic state. Many people who should have done their duty did not. Therefore, somebody had to raise public awareness. The Tibetans also want a constructive dialogue with anyone, with Chinese, with Indians, with the world powers. But they also want that national and international standards should be applied. So India has to take the lead in accordance with its legacy and its philosophy. So I hope we will get from him the guidance. We also have Mr. Satprakash Malviya, a person who comes from a family which dedicated itself to education and freedom, and he himself has been an ardent supporter of the cause of human rights, and in particularly the Tibetans here know him to be a true friend of Tibet. He will also, I hope, say a few words. But I would be failing in my duty if I also do not welcome Mr. Lodi Gyari, who is a special envoy of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and on the world forums has been doing some of the most dedicated work on behalf of Tibet. He is present here. I hope he'll say a few words. But first of all, we have a person who has actually crossed over from Tibet, walked over, Mr. Pempa, and he will take 10 minutes of your time to just explain what it means to know and observe how human rights have entirely failed. And I will therefore, with Chandrasekharji's permission, request Mr. Pampa, and I will request one of our Tibetan friends here to kindly interpret. It will be just for 10 minutes, but we'll get an authentic version of what is happening in Tibet. Please.
Your Excellency, Sri Chandrasekhar, the former Prime Minister of India, distinguished guests and dear friends, it's my great pleasure to be here today to express a few thoughts of my own experience as I've come imprisonment in Tibet before my escape. I would like to briefly mention what Tibet was in the past and what it is at present. Tibet, before 1959, was known as the land of religion. But today, it has been turned into detention of prisoners. It has been turned into creation of soldiers, where you will find people have been imprisoned for no reason, except expressing their own identity. Tibet today is a land of soldiers. Tibet today is a land of meetings where you will find every day Tibetans are being asked to come for meetings. To listen to what the Chinese want to say for the Tibetans. The monasteries, which used to be centers of learning, both for the monks as well as married people, have been turned into creations. The sceneries of the Tibet have been turned into barren. Prisoners have been taken to prison for no reason. Even the slightest of mistakes, what the Chinese call, they have been imprisoned, and not only just keeping in the prison, but they have been asked to work day and night and earn some money, which the prisoners don't have to right to utilize for themselves. But whatever they earn, they have to keep for the welfare of the state, which means for the government of Chinese.
And so I'm alone here to get there, Tavajilama, Tavagabin, and that Dojel Chasham, Nimjil, Gomnida, Mozu to see Martin. Did see there maybe in any conduct on Madango Mary. Madame said this is about Kazin, Alkanga, even mean, and Tawani, the dam, and the women, I think, and our truth in the lodging in the day when you're
To cite an example, if the prisoner is to be released from prison, the prior condition is he will have to give to the state or to the Chinese government per day 1.6 RBM, which means the Chinese money. And if the prisoner fulfills all conditions, if he doesn't have that money, he will not be released, but will be kept continuously in the prison until unless he could get that money. And he can get that money by working in prison itself, nothing else.
And so I'm they shouldn't go in some there Ludone and control charts and among Jumbat and the charts and those my Chiloria, Tonya, fishing individual, and have somebody at Dojan and really changes them in the Trolla Dance and Namsai Capital, Timbegi, in your Geniboya, Poja, those dear and Dejan, in this a new event and the Mina and the Taransa there. Most a new job.
If I just give you a synopsis of what the prisoners are being given, they have been fed, which no human beings can dare to eat. Rubbish things have been picked up from the garbage bins. They were given to the prisoners. And if you find a fatty prisoner, his blood has been sucked and then given to another person who needs a blood. So this is the situation.
Chelsea left chair sugar that Purin, Chelsea left and Jamaican that did Chituja in Nansa, Tabata, and in Zongana lesson, and in the Pulo Chatan Bija, Blow Yuba and those Temena Blue. Tabata and the Pulo Bija, Gig children, and those Rose, Coganaria, Chudaya, and those Jamie, then that German Tango.
Especially if a monk or nun is found to be politically guilty. When I say politically guilty, it is nothing more than expressing to have them freedom of religion, freedom of expression. And they have been taken into prison and they have been asked to remove all their clothes. They have been given electric shocks to get whatever the Chinese learned from the monks and nuns who were imprisoned.
아마도 친구 전에 유모가 봐야 좀 봐야 내야 가서 인도 안에 정말 안 가주야 어디 있는 시도에 아니 이제 이제 또 주부다 하버스다 전화로 분이 정말
In Tibet today, you will find no, there is the law of truth has got no place in Tibet. Even the slightest minor, what they call mistake, is not taken into consideration. And I can cite two clear examples called two prisoners, Tapasari and Solomon, how they have suffered and what tortures they have had.
여기 증거 앞에서 항상 원하는 거 앞에 그럼 어차피 야주들 본 야주의 제리야 아니 증거 주변은 고추 담배 증거 주변은 무슨 뭐를 정말 님버 주도 좀 받이고 다 무슨 님버 때문에 대접에 맞는 저는 니다당 상하여래 니다당 비체는 간다면도 다 대수제 니다 자담 나는 이제치는 코란 나오래 나는 명가에 나좀 또 이제 시에 무슨 야제 지고 말해
Lava Singh, 18 years old, is one of my prison mates. He was arrested in 1990 October, and he was imprisoned. He was beaten, which no words can express how he was beaten. And he fell sick. When he was taken to hospital, the doctors told him he has got no sickness. But in fact, he has hardly any movement of any sense of life.
아니 근데 시도 좀 방도 좀 간데 아니 그게 이걸 컨디션 그게 내가 심리 또 시제 단 나서다 제 저러지 안디 저 안지 가서 버렸네 저거 쉐어 나서디 그네 레레스 쉐어 안디 시도 문제는 나서 인데 저원이나 말에 나서 인데 있는 저번에 차다 나 요신 말에 제제 이시도 있는 안지 디본다 되면 많이야 컵치 되우리 컵이 단지 돈은 먼저 보고 싶어 저거 해야 돼요 그래서 컵 미신단 다 만다 컵인데 되어래
We prisoners have approached the prison authorities, asked them to take Lava Singh into a hospital, examine him thoroughly, and we have told them that it is not an ordinary gastrointestinal, because they have been told that Lava Singh was suffering from gastrointestinal. If that was a gastrointestinal, in his peas, in his excretors, there should be pus. But we have found that in his excretors, we have found pus, we have found blood. This being the case, we have asked him to examine properly in the hospital, but they have refused. The consequences was later on Lava Singh died.
내가 맞아 근데 그 디전 권단에 근데 나와 중립에 주시 권단에 제 매제 저제 구봉샤제 강부디나리아 추mon고 야 간다 저 혼자 지파부들이 속을내 차템다 네가 강으로 줘야지 어느 도수 디전에 아시고 먼저 중립에 처주영아 쇼게 정관을 놀이야 그거체 근데 먼저 간다 저 갈때는 먼저 디마자 안 탐내 먼저 총과제는 안 탄다 아버지를 구멍이 양은 두다기니 시제도 좀 안 먼저 견적이네 미치기 어느 지게 셔 딩도 좀 먼저 구쇼유로 나와서린 나기 디체래 디체는 님이 치는 구분 다가 동인 시제 저기 땡게 띠기 강로 서서 님이 권에 먼저 구분 도를 제시아 강으로 제사
We have been told by the Chinese authorities, no amongst yourself, one force has been reduced, which means Lava Singh was one of the main leaders who led the anti-Chinese within the prison themselves. But the prison mates, we have asked the Chinese authorities, we want to see his dead body, because whether he was died of natural death or he has been killed by the Chinese. But that permission was not given. And we were asked to send one of our representatives, and we elected Yulo Tawasiri, who also was one of the prisoners in Tibet, but again he was denied.
아니 구분 다 주방 먼저 구분 따고 있어 막 구분 대요 말했어 아니 내가 나도 맞대 셔 되긴 진짜 아니 미만면 가게 언제 티요 디 나도 대셔 되도 좀 봐. 니년 셔베 언제 셔베 나도 다다 되고 니년 언제 셔내 돼서 딱 되도 좀 봐. 가서 그래서 유란 나도 돼서 안 거기는 유란 나도 돼 유른 무슨 자차이 되게 나 되면 되는데 돼서 근데 셔버 간다 하면 돼야 가서 저제 간다 되면 도 세게 먼저 먹지게 하고 안 먼저 배동을 스틸이 좀
So To cut everything in short, we were not allowed to see the dead body of Lhagpa Sring, and we were told by one of the doctors who came from People's Hospital that he was died in natural death, and you cannot see his dead body. So this is how Lhagpa Sring was suffered, and how we were deprived of to see even a dead body. And then just after that, the Chinese have publicized it in papers, announced in radios that Lhagpa Sring was died in natural death. But this was just a cover-up for the violation of human rights in Tibet. Another imprisonment, as I told you before, is a Sonam Wandu. He was arrested and kept 7 days and 7 nights on ice, and which paralyzed his lower portion of the body. Since Lhagpa Sring's lower portion of the body was paralyzed, he was not allowed to take any supporter, even a staff. But in spite of that, he was asked to run. Then when he was asked to run, since he could not move his lower part of the body, he has got no chance to do that. Later, I was transferred to a place called Tomo Prison, and then from there, I got a chance to come back again, and I went to see where Sonam was imprisoned. And when I saw him, his lower part of the body was absolutely paralyzed. There was no sense at all in his lower part of the body. No, there are two categories of prison, prison number 1 and prison number 2. In both these prisons, a prisoner is given a ration allowance of, say, Chinese rupees 1.35 per day. With that 1.35 rupees per day, you will have to manage all your necessary basic things. But it's not only that. How long you have been imprisoned in that? You have to labor hard. When you get out, you have to manage. If you are one of the prisoners in prison number 1, you have to manage Chinese rupees 17,000 to get you out from the prison. And that you have to labor within the prison itself, and you have to earn. That you do not have right to utilize for your own benefit, but you have to give to the state so as to get yourself released. This is the situation in prison number 1. In prison number 2, the prisoner's ration allowance is the same thing. What you have to do is you have been asked to work day and night for the improvement of agricultural products. And if you cannot manage to make up the required agricultural product, again you are not allowed to release, even though you do not have any guilt to get yourself out of the prison.
가령스는 파번네 나저 연조다는데 프랑스 세 엔세는 딱 나저 요다다 하고서 안디 좀 바디고 디스 좀 나는 면주시야 차진 전이네요 말은 이게 간다 안 내가 쉬어야 되는 맞한도 스마트 이제 뭔가 쉬어야 된다도 쉬는 쉬사람도 쉬는데도 될 주주다 제가 또 스타다 되면서 시간 제가 샷 프랑스 내집 샷 간다 세베 쉬고 디나리아 나즈메나 마신 프랑스 내집 주제에 근수있는 샷세라 디스는 나저 연은 좀 받대 나즈메나 한번 쓰래 한 제가 안다 지금 뭔가 쉬어야 될 주주다 제가 이거 쓰시는 인터넷 상문으로 돼야 또 스타벼다 부분당하나
To sustain the body and life together of the prisoners, we were given sometimes a little bit of meat. And the condition of the meat is, first they will examine the meat. If the meat is not to be eaten by the Chinese staff, by the People's Liberation Army, or by those who support the Chinese policy, then that meat is given to the prisoners. And then when the prisoners have taken that meat, they definitely feel sick, whereas they don't have any kind of medical care. So this is briefly what the situation, human rights violation in Tibet today is. Although I have a lot of things to say with my own experience, we have a very short time, so I'm very pleased to be here to say a few words what I myself have experienced in Tibet in such a distinguished gathering. And I would like to thank you all very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Distinguished friends here. Tomorrow the entire nation is observing the birthday of our father of nation, Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi not only practiced but also preached ahimsa, which is non-violence, peace and tolerance. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is our guest, and according to our culture, guest is God. Atitha Deva Bhava. A young friend just now narrated in brief the tale of human misery and the violation of human rights. We should see to it that this violation of human rights is curbed in any part of the world. In 1989, I had raised a issue on Tibet, and the present Prime Minister was then External Affairs Minister. I would like to quote only 3 lines from his letter dated March 20th, 1989. Since Tibet borders India and we have close cultural and religious ties with Tibet, concern in India over the development of Tibet is natural. The Dalai Lama is a respected religious and spiritual leader who is held in high regard by the people of India. About 3 years back, His Holiness Dalai Lama was awarded Peace Nobel Prize. I thank Mr. Sondhi for organizing this function today, because Dalai Lama is also spreading the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi throughout the world, that is ahimsa, tolerance and non-violence. I hope every one of us gathered here will see to it that the violation of human rights in any part of the world is no more happening. Thank you.
I now request Sri Chandrasekhar ji to kindly address us.
Friends, it is said that we have to hear the story of anguish. It is not only one part of the world. Every day we hear stories from different parts of the world where human beings are not treated as human beings. Centuries back, we in this country pleaded for compassion, for non-violence, for human brotherhood. From this land, Mahatma Buddha gave us the message of peace, non-violence and compassion. Tibet is the abode of Buddhism. As my friend Satyaprakash Marvi told you, we have cultural ties which are centuries old. We have shared many an experience, and everybody knows whether one agrees with the religious precepts of one religion or the other. But it is recognized all over the world and everyone today that religion is an instrument of communion between man and God. It is an instrument through which humanity wants to get over the weaknesses that of discord, hatred, violence and trying to oppress others. It is unfortunate that in spite of the pleadings and preachings of men like Mahatma Buddha, still we are trying to suppress each other, and it is happening in a part of the world where from here people expected the message of peace and non-violence. My friend Sodhi just told that I am not bound by the diplomatic considerations or niceties of diplomacy. I am conscious of my responsibilities. I know that we want to have a better relation with China because they are our neighbors, and we have been doing everything to see that these relations should improve. But a person like me does not understand how the relationship between two states come to any damage if we talk about the human rights, because how the state was formed, what is the origin of the state? Man, in order to get rid of all his difficulties, all his problems, created the institution of state. Man, when he was not civilized, tried to solve all his problems himself, but he thought it is not possible for him to solve his problems alone, so he depended upon the collective wisdom or the collective strength or the cooperative will through which he could solve his own problem. The state is a peculiar institution. This is the institution which indicates the helplessness of man. Helplessness in the sense that man realizes, when I talk of man, it includes women also, that man realizes that he himself alone is not capable of solving his own problem. Under this feeling, he said, all right, I shall surrender some of my rights to an institution which will take care of the problems which I can't solve myself. But also it indicated that it is an institution of cooperation. It is not one man or a few men, but millions of people or the community to which the person belongs. That community will take care of this problem. The problem of civilization and culture has been whether we expand the area of coercion or we expand the area of cooperation within the state. If we again and again try that certain individuals have got the right to decide for everybody, then situation becomes very difficult. And the sense of cooperation, the sense of goodwill, the idea of compassion gets relegated to the background. So always it has been an attempt to get more and more cooperation of the people. You know that every human being wants to think for himself, because human consciousness cannot be fettered by any idea, by any individual, by any state power, by any coercive measure. Always it has happened in history that new thoughts have come because of the dissent, because of the protest. Howsoever good a civilized society may be, there are always certain problems or certain constraints in the dynamics of change. And there one man stands and says, I just don't accept it. The society needs a reform. The society needs a change. This right of protest is in the root of the development of the social civilization. If you deny the right of protest, then this society becomes stagnant. And in a stagnant society, you can understand it is not possible to keep the harmony, to keep the peace, to keep the idea of compassion, and you cannot have the tranquility. This is why the right of protest should be recognized by every section of the humanity. Unfortunately, this right of protest, if it is not recognized, then comes the violation of human rights, which is known all over the world. Unfortunate it is that it is not being done only in the field of politics, but also in the spiritual matters, in matters of religion. I hope and trust that people will realize that a stagnant society cannot survive for a long. So it is in our own interest that we should allow the forces of dissent to express themselves, and the path of reconciliation, the path of mutual understanding, the path of trying to each other's aspirations and urges is the surest way to keep peace in this world. I am glad that there are some trends, at least I can say some trends in spite of all that what my young friend has said. I am not questioning because he has gone through all this. But there is a trend in the Chinese leadership to have some sort of reconciliation. We heard about in the press, we have been also told that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is also trying to establish some contact with the Chinese authority. I think that this trend should be strengthened. This trend should be encouraged. We in this country will always like to cooperate and to assist any effort for this type of reconciliation. But simultaneously, we feel our duty that we should associate ourselves with the suffering of the humanity, wherever it is. It is not only in Tibet, even in my own country. If there are certain violations of human rights, at least whether in the government or out of the government, I have always raised the voice because the law allows us to punish the guilty, but the authority does not allow us to suppress the voice of dissent, the voice of protest. Because if we do that, then any human being who tries to be God himself, the history, the society destroys that person. I know that there is this tradition of Tibet is not made by politicians. This is not again recognized by state, but it is because of meditation, because of sadhana, or what you say, hard work of seers and sages for centuries altogether. Don't try to destroy the tradition of history, otherwise history does not forgive you. This is why I think, this is what I told in my own country, that if there is any religious tradition, unless it is vicious, unless and until it shatters the fabric of the society, you have no right to change it by your own will because you happen to be in authority. I hope and trust that Chinese leadership will realize it. And I also hope that the representatives of Dalai Lama who are here will convey my regard to His Holiness and also convey my feeling that he should try his best to pursue this path of reconciliation. I am confident, not only hopeful, I am confident that in a very short time people will realize the necessity, the urgency, the desirability of the path of reconciliation. Let us hope that in a short time we shall not be forced to hear this story of anguish, of human suffering, misery in that part of the land. And I wish you all that you should all cooperate in this great endeavor. I thank you for taking this, for getting this opportunity to discuss this vital question. I only make an appeal to you. Don't do anything which again diverts us or again creates an impediment in the path of reconciliation, but surely we should side with the people, with the humanity which is suffering under anguish. Thank you all.
Request Mr. Lodi Gyari, who is the visiting envoy of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to say a few words and perhaps respond.
Your Excellency, Mr. Chandrasekhar, Professor Sandhi, Malveji, my friends. It gives tremendous pleasure for me to be here today because His Excellency, Mr. Chandrasekhar, has been one of my heroes. In fact, I had known him for many years. I remember in the early days when he used to have a little office in the Theatre Communications building in the Connaught Place, which doesn't exist any longer. I used to go to him and take his advice because those were late 60s when I was consultant to the National Parliamentary Group for Tibet, which was headed by Mr. M.C. Chatla. As a matter of fact, the advice and the inspiration that I received from His Excellency Mr. Chandrasekhar has in some way contributed in some of us founding the Tibetan Youth Congress, an organization in exile which today is one of the forefront organizations that fights for the freedom of Tibet. It was in 1970 that we finally launched this organization, but in the late 60s I used to go to him, take his advice and inspirations. And also I feel greatly honored because he's also today the embodiment of what Loknayak Jayaprakash Narayan stood for. And I think, and I would like to ask Mr. Chandrasekhar that there is a dream that I think of JPG which remains unfulfilled. And that certainly is the freedom of Tibet. More than any other person, Your Excellency, you know how much JP felt for Tibet. I had again the honor of visiting Loknayak many times as a special emissary of His Holiness. I used to go to Patna many times, and to Bombay, and here also in Delhi with His Holiness messages or letters. And I know that next to India, I think JP loved Tibet more than any other country or people. So I think His Excellency Mr. Chandrasekhar will help fulfill that dream of his mentor. I have that hope because Shri Chandrasekhar has dared to do things that many other politicians do not dare to do. Yes, example like his commitment, not only commitment, but his open involvement with the democratic movement in Nepal, which Professor Sondi just remarked, is an indication that I think this leader here has that courage and the strength to go out and to be sometimes unpopular, but stand by certain principles that to him is dear. I grew up in India, and let's say particularly in the city. Sometimes I think myself as Delhiwala. And I have known Professor Sondi and Mrs. Sondi for more than 27 years. And I'm one of those Tibetans who have been very fortunate to have met and had opportunity of rather knowing very intimately many of the great leaders of this country. In fact, this is my second home. Next to Tibet, people like us love India more than any other country. I do not live in India anymore, but I always feel so much of love for this country. And many times, even though our voice is weak and small, we also speak up for India, because more than any other people, we know what India stands for and also the greatness of India. So I feel that India certainly has an obligation, and I'm not saying that because I'm Tibetan, but I do certainly feel that you really have an obligation. Let's not talk about Guruchala business, because that also is a fundamental. Yes, we do consider this land which has given us the great teachings of Buddha as land of our Guru. But more than that, I think, even as, shall we say, rational people, I think we both need each other. And it's very important for the Indian leaders and Indian government officials to be, I think, far-sighted and look beyond just the narrow personal political interest or personal career. I know there are, but fortunately, I think, very small minority of people in this country, among government officials, even maybe very, very insignificant, but minority of politicians who feel that our presence here is a liability to you. And that I can say as a person, I think, again, I'm not trying to be, but, understand the situation, I think that is not correct. In fact, if you know how to see the situation, we are an asset to you, a strength to you, and we are not certainly a liability. That is a belief that has been sometimes projected by, as I say, few individuals whose unfortunately view of international politics or geopolitical situation does not really go beyond the files on his or her own desk or beyond personal career promotions. At the same time, we have never urged anyone to be anti-China. Certainly not. We do not want it. I'm not here to urge that the government and people of India take up our cause and be hostile to the Chinese government. Certainly not. We have never asked. In fact, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, has been one of the few leaders who had consistently been urging the world to accept China to the family of the world community. And the days when no one will touch China, and the days when all the Western powers will not even go near Chinese, I know His Holiness used to urge that you cannot ignore a country that has a quarter of the world's population. At the same time, it's also very important for us Tibetans to realize that Tibet will be where Tibet is. We cannot transplant Tibet and move Tibet to middle of Atlantics or middle of the Pacific Ocean. Tibet will have to stay where Tibet is, and that is right there between India and China. So therefore, while it is very important for us to get the support of international community, it is vitally important for us also to have first and foremost the support and understanding of India and Indian people. So both of us, I think, must become much more mature and really look at the things realistically, what we mean to each other. Yes, you may be able to find a solution. You may be able to sign protocols. You may be able to sign agreement with the Chinese government tomorrow by totally ignoring the Tibetans or Tibetan issue. But that would be very foolish, because again, the Indians must also realize that the Tibetan people who inhabit the plateau of Tibet will be there. And I think for 32 years, some of you have tried to ignore that, and I think miserably failed. That is a reality you cannot run away from. Whatever, I think, solution that you can find also in solving your problems with China must take into consideration the issue of Tibet. It is a reality. You must wake up. You must not be fooled by your own short-term interests. I'm sorry for being blunt, because I think among friends, particularly you see India, the Indians whom I consider, as I said, my own second home. And it's also in my nature to be very blunt, because I think, we can always, say very nice things about each other. But I think, we don't have much time, so therefore whenever one has an opportunity, I think it's very important to be explicit. And also I think India must give leadership. As a person who loves India, why you want it always to be a follower? Why don't you give a lead? Gandhiji gave a lead, not only to your people, but to the whole world. He gave a message. But today, if I can be very blunt, in many ways, India has become a follower and not a leader. And yet you have all the credentials, you have all the capabilities to be leader. And that also give a moral leadership. You have a message that no other nation has. And you are shy of giving that message. Again, it sounds very, I think, for Tibetan, but I think, you see, more than many of our leaders is His Holiness Dalai Lama, who today goes and gives the message of Gandhi. When he was awarded Nobel Peace Prize, Gandhiji was excited. Name was mentioned. It was given because he is a person who was trying to continue to do the struggle the way Gandhiji has taught us. So we would like that India give leadership, a moral leadership. We're not trying to again say that you must compete with this and that, certainly not. But the reality is that I think for some time, at least in some areas, I think we have failed to give that leadership. And I think persons like Chandrasekharji has the qualities, the courage to precisely give that leadership. Yes, it is true that we have been making our efforts to try to find a solution. Yes, because His Holiness believes in dialogue. We are committed to that. But in that, I also believe that India can play a positive role. You should not shy away from that. And also, the Tibetans also, I think, should be realistic to get India involved in such process. And the Chinese will also, because again, let me tell you, because I think we Tibetans understand our Chinese friends much more than you do. I'm being very blunt again. Even though I hear some of your politicians sometimes talk about our thousands of years of friendship with China, but the fact is that you did not have thousands of years of relation with China. The only that I know is two Buddhist scholars who came from China and went back with the teachings of Buddha by the Silk Road. We understand China. In fact, I sometimes tell my Western friends that I think we understand both India and China much more than many people, because we physically live between these two great civilizations. And also because of the fact that we have received so much from India, your culture, your civilization. In fact, when we talk about the destruction of our culture, we are also talking about the destruction of your culture, your civilization. When we talk about 6,000 of our monasteries destroyed, they are not just our monasteries. Those monasteries contained the great teachings that has come from your country. In fact, some of the things that you do not have any longer. In fact, we brought back quite a few. In fact, our scholars even today sit in Banaras and translate them back to Sanskrit, to the original, because we have lost it. So we understand the Chinese, I think sometimes little more than at least some of your so-called China experts in South Block. And I tell you, they respect strength. And if India has the strength to tell the Chinese, we have a vital interest in Tibet, that any solution about Sino-Indian relations must also include the future status of Tibet. They may make a lot of noise, they may threaten, but I tell you that if you are consistent with that, they will respect. Because they are not foolish. They have as ancient civilization as you have. And the one thing, they respect strength. They make a lot of noise, but they respect His holiness. Sometimes I tell, Westerners, some friends, isn't the issue of Tibet dead? I say, I don't think so. Because who knows about China, about Tibet more than the Chinese? And if you look at the Chinese propaganda, depending sometimes 30 to 60% of their publications, particularly that is sent out, are devoted on Tibet. They take so much pain to try to contradict everything that we say. Why? Because they know that it is an issue that's not going to go away, and that it is an issue which is very much relevant. They know more than any one of you know. And they are very sensitive about that. You just mentioned Tibet. Many people from the West who go to China, they said that, the moment we mention Tibet, they get so much mad. You can talk about anything to Chinese, but Tibet is something that they are not willing to. Why? Because they know that they are on very, very weak grounds there. So therefore, Your Excellency, you urged us to continue our effort of dialogue. And I will certainly convey that, and my colleague Mr. Minju Doji will certainly convey that to His Holiness and your greetings. But at the same time, I would like to urge that the government, or if not the people of India, take active interest. Do not just be bystanders, but I think for your interest as well as for ours, and for the stability in this part of the world, I think you must become also actively involved. We are asking you to help us find a solution. We are not asking you to give us arms so that we can resist China. Certainly not. We are not asking you to sacrifice your national interest and help us. No. While fulfilling your national interest, while trying to build a lasting relation with China, take also us into consideration, because we are a reality that's not going to go away, no matter how much you try. Some of people in this country tried for 32 years, but unfortunately, it's still there. So thank you very much. And finally, I would like to say I'm very grateful to Professor Sondi for making it possible to have this kind of gathering. And I hope there will be many more such gatherings. And as I said, personally also, I have always valued and greatly appreciated the friendship that I had with the Professor and Mrs. Sondi for I think now 27 years, 27 years. And I would like, Professor and Mrs. Sondi to be symbolized in this friendship, because they have never left us. We had very difficult periods. Some of our friends thought it is a great issue, but he did not believe it. He and Mrs. Sondi stayed with us. Even in the days, there were very few who were willing to talk with us and be our friend. Thank you very much. Thank you, Excellency.
As this function has a certain solemnity based on the fact that it is, in fact, a celebration of Mahatma Gandhi's birthday, we had to take into account the fact that firstly Mr. Chandrasekhar had an accident and he was not well, and then his other engagements in South India were pressing. So I think it would be fair now to conclude this function on this note, to say that this has in fact advanced the understanding of human rights in Asia, and it has also exposed their denial in Tibet. It is linked to Asia because if India and China can agree on human rights in a real sense, not that India should endorse all the violations of Chinese human rights in return for China endorsing all the violations which India does of human rights, that would be a very strange way of Sino-Indian friendship. After all, Hitler and Stalin had an agreement, but the cost was Poland. So you can always have a friendship between two big powers at the expense of a third power. So to have friendship between India and China and to sacrifice the Tibetans would be perhaps the greatest crime in human history, if it takes place. Because we have in India literally nurtured Tibetan culture. They are present here as our invitees today. Some of the finest products of the Indian educational system, I would call it the Indo-Tibetan educational system. These are young men and women who could be the pride of any culture, any civilization. They've been educated in our schools and in Tibetan schools, and the Ministry of Education of the Government of India has done a lot to help maintain the excellence of Tibetan understanding both of Tibet and of India. Sri Chandrasekhar ji, I think, struck the right note when he put his talk in the context of Indian political culture. That itself is something which is very much needed today in the country. That somewhere one should be able to speak of enforcement and at the same time speak of dissent. There is a continuum between the two. And I really feel that any serious political scientist in India today will have to tackle this macro problem of the Indian political culture. Because we find we are making so many errors of judgment, we are getting into so many black holes, and we are presenting the spectacle of a nation which is fostering conflict at almost every level. There must be some basic reason to it. And I think we have today a dialogue between Mr. Chandrasekhar and, I would say, some of the best Tibetans here. A dialogue between a Hindu and a Buddhist. A dialogue between an Indian and people in the world. A dialogue between one who is a follower of Gandhi and Jayaprakash Narayan, and also between those who are present here who may represent various traditions, including the Marxist tradition. But the point is that out of this dialogue, there must emerge now an answer. And that answer has to be sought in terms of our own approach to these problems, our sophistication, our way of tackling problems. And if we heard the anguish which our brother from Tibet brings, this anguish found a response here in the whole audience. So with this holistic approach, with this total approach, it will be possible not to indicate our helplessness now, but rather to think of some very practical measures which can be taken in issues which are arising within the country, in various parts of our country, in issues which are arising in our neighborhood, and in issues which are perhaps more distant in war-torn Europe today. So I think in all these matters, it is possible for some of us to feel encouraged by the response we have received today, that we could hold perhaps a number of workshops in which we could take up the problems relating to Tibet, relating to Burma, relating to other parts of Asia, relating to parts of India where we don't find the human rights situation satisfactory. We would like to work on it, and we can assure you that those of us who are concerned with that area where journalism, education, and politics join together, that we have, in fact, received inestimable help from Sri Chandrasekhar. I remember a lecture given by him here. This was on the eve of the declaration of the emergency. It led to the declaration of the emergency in one sense because Mr. Chandrasekhar posed the issue so starkly here in India International Center. And there were all these issues there. The problem of Indian poverty, the problem of Indian governance, and the problem of Indian dissent. I would therefore like to conclude today's deliberations by expressing on behalf, I hope, of all of us, good wishes to Mr. Chandrasekhar, wishing him a speedy recovery from his accident, and also expressing the hope that apart from whatever are the short-term fluctuations in politics, he would keep his sights high, and we would all wish him well on his own journey, and also hopefully a journey in which all of us can go to peace, freedom and progress. I conclude this therefore by a vote of thanks to Mr. Chandrasekhar and invite you to join me.
Rajkumar?
Hungarian's quality for Tibet is very
आपकी गाड़ी है आइए पार्टी अभी चलिए
मैं आपको सीमांत कर